Welcome to Central Conversations. It's a podcast of conversations with interesting people who can help us with the issues that we're facing in our lives. Over the past several months, we've dealt with a lot of stress and anxiety. And so for our first inaugural podcast, we want to interview Julie Richards, who's a professional counselor and a podcaster, lives outside of Columbus, Ohio, who has a lot of insights, who can help us with some of the stress and anxiety that we're dealing with. If you find this podcast helpful, I just invite you to like it, subscribe to our channel, and share it with people who you think this might be helpful with. Let's go right to the interview. I want to welcome you to the podcast today. We have two special ladies who are here. The first of which I want to introduce is my wife, Kate. Glad that she is here, and Julie Richards. And Kate is going to introduce Julie today.
Yes, hi. Well, when Scott said he wanted to do a podcast, I said, you need to have Julie on. And she's being our first guest. I'm so excited. I met Julie in 1998 when we moved to Wilmore, Kentucky. My husband, and I guess I did too, went to college with Julie's husband, Todd. And so they just welcomed us to the community. I was pregnant, and after I had the baby, Julie brought over food and invited me to Bible study. And I've continued to seek Julie out over the years, and just been great to watch her grow. And but really, her specialty is helping people in trauma, helping children in trauma, and being a pastor's wife and trying to help people. I really needed wisdom, and I would often call Julie. So I'm so glad that Julie's here today, and you guys get to hear her and hear the wisdom that she has. So welcome, Julie.
Thank you. It is very endearing to be able to spend the time with you guys. And you're so good on your years. I'm like, okay, what year was that? And you've got it all figured out.
Kate's got a great memory. She could remember.
Does, apparently. I'm impressed.
Well, you made a big impression on me. You were always just always seeking the Lord and seeking wisdom and truth and healing and health. And you're continuing to do that and helping so many families, especially in trauma. And so especially now in the pandemic, what wisdom we can, hear from you today. I'm excited.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, let me give you everybody a little bit of background, your professional background. Julie's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She got her undergraduate from the University of Pittsburgh. And she has her master's from Wright State University, where she had a master's in clinical mental health. She now lives in the Columbus area. She's a licensed professional clinical counselor at JHR Counseling and Consultation. I learned she's a podcaster, and also she has a lot of different focuses. She helps people with addiction, codependency, grief and loss, depression, mental distress, sexual addiction, relational trauma, abuse, spiritual abuse and trauma, EMDR, as well as an advanced trauma training in trust-based relational intervention. Correct?
Close. Trust-based.
Trust-based. Okay.
Relational intervention. TBRI is very much known in the community of adoptive families, foster families, kids from trauma.
Okay. Well, welcome, and thanks for joining us. And for people who don't know you, how would you like to introduce yourself to folks?
Well, I am a wife and mom. I have, we have 4 adolescents, because the brain doesn't stop developing until you're 25 or 30. So we have 3 of our kids are in their 20s. And our youngest is 17, and she's from China. And I love the journey of healing growth across the lifespan. And so that's what I'm committed to. And so it's awesome to continue to develop and grow, and that we don't have to get stagnant or stop. There's always more to discover and explore. And I'm passionate about doing that. I have, just as a fun little thing, I have 1 million books that I surround myself by and stack by the bedside, stack in the living room, in my bookshelves. But I only do a little bit at a time. That's all I can really have the bandwidth for. But I am so hungry to always keep learning more and growing more. And I'm just really excited for that process for other people too.
Well, this has definitely been an opportunity for growth during this time, a lot of time alone. And so, Kate and I have a couple questions. We just thought
Mhm.
we're launching this just to try to help people with things that they're thinking. First question is, what are some of the common struggles that you find people in your practice are dealing with, day in, day out?
Specifically related to the pandemic or
Yeah,
more
I'm sure you've
broadly?
seen more increase of certain things during the pandemic, but what are some of the things that you're seeing in people's lives that they need just to unpack and talk about?
I think related to all of 2020 took all of mental health to a whole new level, as far as uh, the uncertainty of what even is a pandemic and how that impacts us. Being told an an ongoing evolving of information, so things that information changed from. I know initially it was you don't have to wear a mask, and then it's now we do have to wear a mask, or restrictions, and trying to make sense of how scary that was that everything changed so fast. How invasive that became for everybody was very overwhelming for folks. But the pandemic itself was like one tier, and then we went through all kinds of racial unrest and systemic racism coming to the forefront, and then political unrest with the election and with the various viewpoints that are very divided. Our nation is very unsettled and divided. And so all those three things have been really a common thread for people. And I've found that it sometimes frustrates people who are trying to do trauma work and work on their own history, relationships, family of origin, all kinds of stuff. And they're finding that we have to really help get through where we are right now with just our world and country, and all the layers of that have just intensified things. I think some people have found that those who have struggled with mental health and anxiety and depression over the course of their life, I've heard some people say, finally, other people can now get what my whole life has been like, because they're, it's more common for people to talk about what they're feeling or that they're struggling. So those people feel like less alone. But the weight of all of it and the long termness of it is very heavy. Any struggle that we've had, even as a nation, if you think back to like 9/11 is probably one of the biggest in our more recent history. That was a day. And this is like week after week after month, and there's not the end in sight yet. I mean, we're on the end of the vaccine, but all of this, and this I think in particular has so many different viewpoints, opinions. People contradict each other. People are offended by each other. It's almost like we've had the collective angst of our society all bubbled up. And so everybody is feeling more intense emotion and distress and overwhelm, exhaustion, isolation, all of that.
So, like, what I guess part of it is like, and I was saying this a little earlier, one of the things I try to do as a pastor is to call people and check on people and talk through things. And sometimes they're just, um, people just need to talk and talk it out, and they don't have a professional counselor. How do people kind of deal with all their angst? I mean, with all the anxiety that they're feeling, I'm sure there's some, common coping mechanisms, or what type of advice do you kind of give to them as they try to become less anxious?
Mhm. There's like 5 questions in that all at once. How do people cope? A lot of times we have ways that are healthy to cope and ways that aren't. And so I think a lot of people turn to, say, alcohol probably has increased because people are overwhelmed, so they're drinking more, which is creating more of a problem
Mhm.
instead of a help. Um, There are people who would normally cope with having good skills for going to the gym or spending time with a friend or going out for coffee or things like that, that have all been derailed by, having gyms that close or schedules that change, or sometimes for a stay-at-home parent who's used to having kids go off to school part of the day. Their mental health has been shifted by having to do homeschooling or online schooling. I know the terminology of that is, homeschoolers who are official homeschoolers are different than those who are trying to adjust to doing online schooling. So I don't want to overstep anybody's wording on any of that. But, and then those who have their job to juggle as well, while they're all home and all, it's like we're isolated, but we're also so much on top of each other and within our homes. It's impacting marriages, increases in divorce, things like that. So how are people coping? Well, some are and some aren't. So, if they're going to something kind of as an unhealthy outlet or don't know how to even cope, sometimes if you don't have a good solid base of where do I turn for support when I'm overwhelmed, which is kind of the question that you're also asking in that, what can they turn to? If you don't have any base for that, all of a sudden you've been hit with a tsunami of stress this past year. So it's like, how do I even know what to do? I always encourage people to start with the basics of your sleeping and your eating and your hydration, drinking water. Those are very fundamental to our mental health. And so making sure that you're not getting too much of or too little of. So having things in moderation. So sleeping, for instance, is really healthy if you're getting a good night's sleep at night. But if you're sleeping all the time or you're not sleeping at all, then that's going to be harder on your mental health. Sleep is a hard thing for people because sometimes when you're anxious and you can't get to sleep or you're feeling like insomnia, then that is going to disrupt your mental health or how you're feeling. Same ideas with eating. Like if you're eating a whole bunch of junk or sugar, we tend to crave carbs and sweets whenever we're stressed, but that's not really giving us the nutrients that we need to be able to give us a good solid foundation for our mental health. Drinking, obviously we need a whole lot of water, but people tend to drink more soda, pop, sugar, alcohol, things like that, that aren't going to really support their bodies in good health. So trying to focus on physical health as a basis. Movement is really important. Sometimes people are intimidated by exercise because they don't know how to exercise or where to start. So I encourage folks to do things of even just stretching your body, like lifting your arms and feeling where you're holding tension in your body. Like become more aware of that, because we hold a lot of stress in our neck, in our shoulders, in our joints, in our hips. All of that gets really tight. And so we need to be able to have more stretching, more movement so that we can feel like we can manage some of that stress and feel better inside.
Yeah. You're making me want to stretch right now.
You know what? Do it. Like it would be better for you if you did. Just like listen to your body. I love that feeling. Like it feels so good on my muscles to be able to, and I will do that with people in session of, sometimes they're probably just looking at me like, okay, let's see. And they're like, well, why is she doing that? But it's so good for you. It helps so much. And especially people that are intimidated by, being told, sometimes people are told by their doctor, you need to exercise more. Well, that is easy for some folks and hard for others. But starting by saying, can you do this? Like, as long as you don't feel too weird and, because some people are afraid to do it maybe with me in a session or something, but like, that's a starting point. Being able to stand up and move, maybe instead of, sitting on the couch all day, if we're working from home, or sometimes people are binge watching Netflix or something, if you can get up and move around the house, even That's helpful. Get outside a little bit, get some fresh air. You know, even if the weather isn't ideal because there's rain coming down or snow, or just getting outside even for small amounts of time can make such a difference. Spending time in any kind of nature. I've got like 10 different plants in my office that I'm fascinated by how they change and grow and get little things shooting out from them. I could spend all kinds of time telling you about my plants. I mean, like that kind of stuff is very peace giving and enriching, enlivening.
So really, like starting small with one thing can just lead to a different positive mental state, and maybe lead to another thing, and not try to take, climb the mountain. Instead, just take one step.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I know it's been challenging for parents, you mentioned, and I think Kate had a question about parents.
Well, it sort of goes along the same line. Julie, what do you recommend for parents, or any advice for parenting teens or children that are exhibiting this anxiety? We have now they're more, I know, more anxious about going out and school, and any words of wisdom for parents out there?
Yeah, absolutely. The first and foremost thing I would say would be to get healthy yourself. You can't parent beyond where you've gone yourself. And so that means figuring out what are these things that our buttons get pushed. Explore that with curiosity, with compassion for yourself, to say, what is coming up with me? Because I think what we find sometimes with parents is they will bring a child or adolescent to counseling to fix them, or that there's something wrong with my child, there's something wrong with my adolescent. And really the root of that does start in how we parent, because we are reacting and responding in ways based on where we're unresolved. Things will impact us more that we haven't finished working in that area yet. And we're all a work in process. And so, I would say, and I've reflected on this in my own healing journey, that it is the work of the Holy Spirit to bring something up in us that isn't yet resolved. Like, that is a merciful and graceful God that allows it to keep coming up, because he wants us to find more healing in that, more growth in that. Kind of like if you don't pass the test the first time, there's going to be another test on that until you get it a little better. But it is a really important thing that the parent is very self-aware and very much aware of what is this bringing up for me? What am I bringing to my relationship with my child or adolescent? How am I responding? And the thing that I love about that, really, as a great encouragement, is that is also our locus of control. Like, we cannot control another person as much as we want to. We can create the best possible environment for them to grow and to be as healthy and strong as possible. But ultimately, there is nothing we can do to control another person. And so our locus of control is, how do I respond? What do I do whenever I see my child or adolescent who is anxious, for instance? What's my response? The healthiest thing that I can think of, and the safest thing that I can think of, is to be a strong support for that as a parent. So what does that look like? What does that even mean? What does it mean to be safe as a parent? It means that all feelings are valid and have a place that they need to be processed and talked about. It means that validation is really important, that I can cause injury to someone if I make light of what they're experiencing. If I invalidate and say, that's fine, we're going to be okay, don't worry about it, that's dismissive, that's hurtful, and it causes someone to question their reality, which is really dangerous from a psychological standpoint of how that impacts a child or adolescent across their lifespan. So I think anything of trying to hear and understand and bring compassion and curiosity. And so when we do that, what we call that in attachment language is co-regulation. So I'm there as a parent to help support my child or adolescent in what they're experiencing, so that they know they're not alone and that there's someone who cares and will walk it with them. And I won't judge them for it. I won't shame them for it. I will just help them make sense of what they feel overwhelmed by. And so I let them know it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be overwhelmed. I get that way too. Let's talk about it. And it's hard with kids and adolescents. I will tell you that part of our humanness, this isn't a bad thing against kids or adolescents, but part of it is that we have those needs at really unpredictable times and sometimes inconvenient times. And so kids will want to talk at midnight, or when your day is end and you're tired, or when you're out of steam, or it might not always be the best timing. And I encourage parents to prioritize their kids when they come to them, because they aren't going to always come to you. They're only going to come to you sometimes. And so prioritize that as this has to get bumped up on my list as first and foremost. And then when they pull back, because teens often do, or kids, need time away, then that's when you can catch up the things on your list that you need to do, or get your chance to refuel, because they will back up and they won't constantly be there needing something from you. But if they do, I'd prioritize that first.
That's good. One of the things that I've seen a lot on social media throughout this pandemic with folks is about anger, frustration, really disappointment with some things like birthdays, not being able to celebrate them, or graduations, or even funerals, or I know several funerals have been postponed until things are better, or holidays, not being able to gather like they would like to. The whole idea of grieving losses. I mean, some of the people watching might have some losses that maybe they're not even aware of, that are beneath the surface, that they're really grieving. Any advice that you'd have to try to, how they help them to, in terms of the getting healthy, of how they grieve their losses more in a more healthy way?
Yeah, I think the importance of understanding that it is grief and that it is loss, because sometimes, it's amazing how quick we are as parents, as spouses, as friends. We don't like seeing our loved ones hurt. We don't like seeing them disappointed or sad. And so often the very first thing that comes out of our mouth is very automatic. And it's, I had a conversation with one of my teen clients at Thanksgiving who was really sad about not being able to be with the grandparents for the traditional Thanksgiving. And I have the session with the parent as well, who happens to be an adoptive parent. But the first thing out of her mouth is, well, we're going to have really good things, and we have our favorite foods, and it's all going to be and she's trying to bring it to the good. Where's the good? Let's find the good and focus on the good, which has merit on some level. However, it's missing a really important step, and that's allowing somebody to have their pain and their sadness and their hurt first. The first step is to connect and to say, it is really hard. I am really sad too that we can't have that celebration, that graduation, that wedding, that the funeral that we thought we would have. Whatever it is that is a loss, name that loss, name what it feels like, and allow there to be a moment for that without continuing the same sentence. Because if we say but in the sentence, like, I know we can't spend time with grandma, but we can do this, it absolutely invalidates everything in the first half of your sentence.
Yeah.
So just allowing it to sit, being able to be present with someone who's hurting without having to change their hurt. Their hurt is valid, and the sadness and the disappointment is real. And so just being able to acknowledge it and sit with that is helpful. And then from there, we can bring it to places of encouragement and support. I'm not saying those aren't valid too. They are important. But if we jump to that too fast, we've missed the connection that's needed to help heal.
And, one of the things I think that's really important is being able to talk to somebody about it, who can draw you out, who maybe you're not related to, or maybe you just need to talk about some things. Sometimes, I know Kate and I have gone to counseling. I've gone to counseling myself, and sometimes counseling has kind of a stigma to it. Like you got something wrong and you need to go get fixed. Sometimes it's a barrier, financial as well. I mean, what would you say to somebody who um, maybe is afraid to pursue talking to a counselor? Um, uh, just some helpful things to kind of cross that barrier if they feel like they really do need to talk to somebody professional who can help them, better understand what they're feeling.
I'm hoping that, with time, we are learning to reduce that stigma. Hopefully our culture, I'm not saying it's not there still. It is there, but we have so many opportunities for healing now that they didn't have a generation or two ago. I would say that it is extremely important to find a good connection of where you feel safe with someone. There are sadly good therapists and bad therapists, not just, it's not always the right fit. And I'm amazed sometimes when people come to me to share their past counseling experiences that have not been good. And so it is intimidating and it is hard because it's like, well, what if I don't find the right person? If you have anyone that that's in counseling who likes their therapist, that's sometimes a way to learn about some connections. So it feels a little bit less intimidating. If we are in counseling and we have safe people around us, our friends, that we can be open to say that we're in counseling, to say like, this is helping me. Like I encourage people to the extent that they feel comfortable or safe to share that. I think it helps to know that it's the wisest people on the planet who are in counseling. That's what I think, because everybody needs it. Everybody needs it. And honestly, when we have people who are not in counseling, that's where it's really hard to manage the relationships that we have, because people don't have a framework for how to get through conflict or difficulty or emotions. We're not always taught that in our homes. We're more often taught what not to do, but we think it's normal because that's all we've ever seen. And so we need to have somewhere that we can start to learn what's healthy and not what's perfect. I mean, I am not a perfect human being, and that perfect person isn't out there, but just being able to understand that maybe the reason why, there's been a whole lot of frustration or conflict or pain or suffering or whatever is because the system itself didn't know how to handle that. The system, our family systems didn't know how to teach mental, emotional, relational health. If you're not brought up with that and you haven't done the work to do that, there's no resource for you to know what to do. And there's a void of that. It's null and void because there's no framework for understanding it. But if we invest in counseling and healing and growth, which can come through podcasts and can come through great resources and books and solid relationships and things like that. But if we make that investment, it is the best thing we can do with our life.
That's a good word. Go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, what would you suggest? Well, I know you're a Christian, and so you're a Christian counselor. Somebody seeking a counselor, would you recommend the Christian counselor versus secular counselor? There's a lot of differences within that when you're looking for a counselor.
Yeah, there is definite differences. The counseling that I do as a Christian, that shapes who I am as a person. But I have also found that there are a lot of people who have been wounded by the church and by family systems and things. So there are some who really need to explore some spiritual abuse or things that have been not healing or helpful for them. So my biggest priority is not on Christian counseling personally. What I would want more than anything is someone who is healthy and safe and that I can work through anything that I'm feeling. Like that's a top priority. Sometimes the thing that concerns me about Christian counseling or Christianity itself is that sometimes we can do something called spiritual bypassing, which is we focus so much on spiritual things that we don't realize that underneath that there's a whole lot of wounding or emotional pain that we've stuffed down with everything that on top will put a Band-Aid of a Bible verse or a Bible study or Christian language, which, you know, I'll disclose my own story that I coped with my pain for probably 15 or more years by doing every Bible study out there. And it wasn't what I needed to help heal my heart. It was valuable. I grew in my relationship with God, which is very foundational to who I am. And it's very genuine in who I am, but it didn't heal the deep wounds in my heart. I think God was in all of my healing in my own story, in my own counseling as the client. This is a second career for me. So I spent many years doing my own healing, and it was not Christian counseling, but it was knowing that God is the healer and that he's in the middle of all of that. Like he is helping me heal. He is allowing me to heal and to grow. And so one of the resources I'll just mention that was, I think, very helpful for me and for many people is Emotionally Healthy Spirituality with Peter Scazzero. That framework is helpful to understand that we need both. We don't need just spiritual health or emotional health. So having both of those are really important, and to not feel so threatened or shattered by someone saying, like, let's just focus a little bit on emotional health, mental health, things like that, like that they are really needed. We are whole beings. God created us as whole beings, and we are incredibly complex, dynamic people. And our spirituality can be the core and the foundation of who we are, and it can be a passion of ours. But if we're only focusing in that area, we've neglected an enormous amount of who we are as people. And I would say that we can't really glorify God if we're only part of a person, if we're not really working in all, like we're not fully glorifying what he's created in us, if we're not wholly committed to him in all the areas that we work through, all of the layers. That to me, I think, is a deeper faith and a deeper healing and a deeper wholeness. So that's where I think ultimately what they tell you in research is that the relationship that you have with your therapist is very fundamental to if counseling is going to work or not. So if you feel like you have a good connection and a safe person, I'm not saying there's something wrong with Christian counseling. I'm just saying make sure that you're well-rounded in your whole person, your whole personhood, you know, that's one part.
That's great advice. I mean, I think it's so helpful. And I've read Peter Scazzero's book as well and listened to some of the podcasts that have been really helpful. I'm wondering about, you mentioned resources, and I know our time's limited because you're fitting us in between your appointments. I want to be sensitive to that. So what resources would you either refer people to listen to, or to read, or, and then also I just say, you know, what are the resources as people of faith that we can authentically use to kind of handle and overcome some of the stress and anxiety that we're feeling?
There is such a wide range on that topic. I don't know that I can justify it with a good answer, but I can say, I mean, some of my favorite resources, I do have a tab on my website that lists out for understanding. Some of it is trauma related. I think there's not clear understanding as a culture that we all have trauma, that I ascribe to the training of Pia Melody, who says trauma is anything less than nurturing. So anything that is unresolved for us is going to create what Besser van der Kolk says is where the body keeps the score. People may have heard of that book. It's internalized in us that we need to work through and resolve the things that have hurt us. it could be really small things, but they will stay stuck in us if we don't ever face them or work on them. So I would refer people as a starting point to that list that I have there, because there's links and everything. There's probably about, I don't know, roughly 18, 20 different things that I love. But yeah, that's a really broad question. So it's like, I can't really tell you without knowing more of what you're looking for. I mean, I'm constantly, like I said, surrounded by books, and I have a million resources that I can tell people, but
well, I think that's great. I mean, what we'll do in the show notes is we'll identify some of those resources that you have with your website. I checked out your podcast and how you have different seasons on different topics, and I thought that's a good way for people to look. Kate, do you have any? And I want to honor your time. Kate, do you have any questions that you'd want to ask Julie as we kind of wrap up?
Well, I could pick her brain forever. Julie, you're amazing. I just loved everything that you said. I think, just really seeking health and whole body, the whole person. I love that. And I love what you said about parenting, and it makes me want to pause. And when I see a child of mine being anxious, to really take a breath and listen and try to be in that moment to listen to them. So thank you for your words of wisdom. Thanks for sharing that today.
Yeah, I'm glad to.
If anybody wanted to reach out, I know you're in Ohio, but if they wanted to find out any information or what would be the best way to do that?
I would say through my website, jhrcounseling.com. There is a contact tab on that, but it also has resources. It has my podcast. It has my blog. The blog that I started in September or so is committed to smaller amounts of content, because what I found, one of the things from the pandemic is that everybody thinks they have to communicate to everybody about all the things. And our bandwidth is like shut. Like, we have so little bandwidth to be able to explore the things that we need to. And so I write with that in mind, that we only have so much time and we only have so much bandwidth. But then within each one, I've started including journaling prompts and action steps. And so there's a brief, thing that I'm talking about, and then something that people can engage with if they want to journal or just reflect. And you can do that kind of thing for 5 minutes or less, or you could do it for an hour. I mean, just however much you want to get into it. And then the action steps are, so often, people will say things like, well, that's great, but I don't know what to do with that. Like, I don't know how to take concepts and what health looks like into translating that into my life. So the action steps are some things like that put some skin on it a little bit to help it make more sense.
Okay. Well, we'll link to that as well. And once again, I really think you've helped a lot of people today. I think you've brought light to some areas that people, need to consider growing in. And so I just want to thank you for your time today. Thanks so much, Julie.
Absolutely. I just want to normalize for people too, that it's all of us. Like, this is humanity, that we all need the time and attention to be able to reflect and to grow and to connect with others. Like, that doesn't make anybody better than or less than. Like, we are all in this lifetime in our human bodies, and we've been given as much time as we've been given. We don't know how long that will be. But as long as we're here, make the most of it, live your best life and invest in it well, because that's, what greater thing can you do with your calling than that? So.
That's awesome. Well, once again, thanks so much, and God bless you.
Good to be with you guys.